You know, I spent my life trying to be cool and succeeding, I'll have you know. But it is, man, you got to be really careful. Cool kills. All I saw was death. And all I wanted to do was die, get it over and done with. This is a terrible thing to say, but I realised that everyone would be better off without me. I could be the guy who invented really nice fluffy things to hang yourself with. Like surely
there's probably a market in that.
There would have to be, wouldn't there? And then there was this sense, I love you. I mean, either all of this is a miracle or none of it is a miracle.
Monty Webber, how are you, mate?
Good, Fred, how are you?
Very good. Mate, I think you're one of the few people I know who, if I ask you that question and you say good, it's a point of particular triumph.
Yeah, well, that's true.
You've come a long way, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a big decade, that last one. Not that the ones before it weren't that big either.
So tell me about, so you've come out of a benzodiazepine nightmare.
Yeah.
Tell me, is it possible to describe in words what it's like at the bottom of that benzodiazepine hell?
Well, do you know, my joke is that we're going to have to invent new words to describe that particular kind of hell that happens to people who suffer from, well, it's called the paradoxical effect of benzos. But mine was layered with a variety of other prescription drugs, including antidepressants, antipsychotic, and also an opiate. But I had a pre-history of drug and alcohol abuse, but I was clean and sober for 10 years when I had an anxiety attack and went to my family doctor. And, you know, I was clean and sober, not taking any pharmaceutical drugs at all, not even headache tablets. And within, I don't know, 6 months or a year, I was taking 5 different mind-altering drugs, which completely destroyed my life.
What drove you? What was the despair? What was the depression that?
Well, it was actually an anxiety attack, so it wasn't depression.
What was your life situation at the moment? Why were you having an anxiety attack?
Well, it was you know, a whole series of things had gone wrong in a row, and some psychologists described that, you know, any one of us is only 3 or 4 or 5 bad things in a row away from having a breakdown. And the thing is, you start to see the pattern. You go, oh, I can see this. This is terrible. It's gone, you know, the good days are in the past. And, you know, there was a marriage breakdown.
You had kids at the time?
Sorry?
You had kids at the time?
Yeah, and I was full-time caring for 2 of my kids. And
how old were they at the time?
Well, they were in their teens, and I preferred them much more when they were younger.
Yeah.
They were much nicer. I liked it when they liked me.
Yeah.
I love that.
Teenagers are difficult, yeah, for the record.
Well, yeah, and they were wild, and we were in Yamba, and they had the run of the place. So they were coming and going from the flat that we lived in, and I couldn't say no. I'd never learned how to say no, and I learnt that. That was the toughest lesson in my life.
So it was raising teenagers by yourself that caused you to have this panic attack?
Well, do you know what? There was a few other things that happened. One of the things that really led to it was my car broke down. I was on my way back from Vipassana, meditation retreat, and my car broke down, and I took it to the mechanic, and he had it for like 3 months, and I really needed that car, and he couldn't fix it. He couldn't work out what was wrong with it, but I've never had money, so I should have just worked out getting another car. But he kept saying, you know, oh no, just leave it with us, I'll work it out. But I had kids, and I had to get them to school, I had to go shopping, I had all sorts of things. We had dramas. Flynn had asthma. I had to get him to hospital sometimes in the middle of the night. But so it was a whole lot of different things. But that not having a car, and then I was living downstairs from this fisherman, Batty Trelaw, legendary Australian surfer, and he's one of my favourite people in the world. But he gets up at...
Well, for viewers who aren't familiar, Batty Trelaw was one of the stars of Morning of the Earth, the definitive Australian surf movie.
Yeah,
so you were friends with Batty.
Yeah, and he's a great guy, but he, being a fisherman, he'd get up at 3:30 in the morning every morning. So that was a part of what happened. I was waking up really early and then not being able to go back to sleep because he had his bait box right near where my head was downstairs from where he was living. And but then it was just the nature of the place I was living in. It was like a fishbowl, so you kind of felt like people were looking in the whole time. Then there was the sound. There was the sound of the chairs upstairs on the lounge room floor, on the wooden floor. I was like in the basement, and then there was the final straw was sewage started coming up through the toilet, the waste,
So
toilet.
your life is falling apart, is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
And
So you went to the doctor and said...
no, I had an anxiety attack, and I'd never had an anxiety attack before in my life. Well, I actually have had anxiety my whole life, but I didn't really realise what it was. The term we had at home was, they always said, was Mont's freaking out. Like I'd freak out. It was like I'd get really freaked out because I couldn't work out what was going on. And they were like little panic attacks. But I didn't realise what they were, and no one really put a name to it. But this night, my daughter Tallulah and I were meant to go to Sydney the next day, and the guy had told me the car would be ready, and it wasn't. And he told me at that point that he wasn't going to be able to fix it. And Tallulah, my youngest, was staying the night, and my other two were staying with their mum, and it became apparent that I couldn't take her. And I just felt so guilty that I'd promised her that we were going to go to Sydney, and then it turned out we weren't going to go to Sydney. I mean, I was just exhausted, and I really needed help with parenting.
Describe the panic attack.
Oh man, it was something else. It was so out of proportion to what had happened. It was like falling in off a cliff. It's so much more than just anxiety. Is so much more than just that one word. So is depression. And I didn't know this until I went through what I went through. But the anxiety attack was absolutely physical. It was like a churning stomach. It felt like someone had your guts and they were just like kneading it like dough. There was just this absolute panic in my brain, but it was all aimed at me being a bad person. It was like somehow I broke. It was like a repetitive strain injury. My brain just broke, and I couldn't see any way, of working out what we were meant to do. Like if it had been a couple of months earlier, I would have just organised catching the train down, or we could have flown down. It wasn't as big a problem as I imagined, but it went all night. I did not sleep one wink. Tallulah went to sleep, and I lay there, literally convulsing, and it was like it was the level of panic that I was experiencing would be appropriate if, say, you were in Nazi Germany and they were about to come and invade your home and take your family away.
So in hindsight, yeah,
it was as much panic as you could feel,
yeah,
irrespective of the fact that kind of nothing had really happened.
Yeah. So that drove you. Why do we feel the need in a moment like that to seek the help of a medical doctor?
Well, yeah, I wasn't thinking clearly anyway, and I went to my family doctor, and he could see the state I was in. As soon as he saw me, he said, "What happened?" I said, "I haven't slept a wink. I've just had the most incredible anxiety attack that's gone all night, and I don't know what to do." And he just said, he actually had his own Valium. He was taking Valium. And so he gave me one of his, and very quickly I just went, oh my God, far out. For the first time in, 10, 12 hours, I actually just got back into my own body and just went, far out, that's better. And
Did you feel functional? Did it make you functional as well?
Yeah, well, it felt like I was kind of how I was meant to be. And there was, look, having a history of drug and alcohol addiction in my life, I drank and drug for 25 years and got into AA 21 years ago. Didn't have any drugs or alcohol since then, other than the prescription drugs. But it really agreed with me, the benzos. Like all the drugs he gave with me, I love mind-altering drugs. You know, I've taken a lot of acid and a lot of cocaine, and I really always loved the feeling of not just partying, but that sense of it's an adventure. You're going on some kind of a mental adventure. And so the Valium kind of took me to some other place that I hadn't really been to before. It was I'm not sure what goes on in your brain, but it affects some part of I think your GABA receptors apparently.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing was, with all of the drugs, the prescription drugs I took, I don't think that any of them are necessarily intrinsically bad, but you just can't take them endlessly. They're for, you know, I should have only taken Valium like for maybe a week, not for years.
But you found you couldn't get off them. How can you take them for a week if you...
No, I could have got off them if I knew. Well, the first thing I said to him was, I can't take anything that's addictive. He knew I had problems with addiction, and he had my phone number on a post-it note in his little surgery there, in his practice. If anyone needed to go to an AA meeting, you know, they'd ring me. But he knew that I had problems with addiction. I told him I can't take anything addictive, and he said they're not addictive. You can go off them at any time. But the problem was...
Well, that's a lie.
Yeah, well, you know, the longer you're on them, the harder it is to get off of them. But there was so much going on in my head by the time I became suicidal a couple of years later, and that was because there was so many other drugs in there as well.
Yeah, well, let's talk about how he scaled it up, because if I'm not mistaken, you went back to the doctor and said, look, you know, I've still got problems, and instead of seeking some sort of holistic solution, he just upped your dosages, didn't
Completely. The solution was always more pills. That was it. There was never a psychologist or, you know, a referral to a psychiatrist or anything. I mean, the psychiatrists that I've talked to since have said he should never have prescribed any of those mind-altering drugs.
Do you think he was on the take?
Well, he certainly had all of his sponsors in order. You know, all the pens and the pads and stuff were pharmaceutical companies, and I don't. It's a big topic for me to get into. Like, I don't know, you know, what's going on with the pharmaceutical companies. You know, it's a huge subject, but he was taking the pills himself. Like certainly the Valium and the Seropax. So he prescribed me Seropax as well, which is another benzo, and to sleep. So I was on Valium during the day, Seropax at night, and also this Lexapro, which is an SSRI, which is serotonin reuptake inhibitor for depression. And
so just to clarify, benzodiazepines or Valium are for depression, and SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they're for anxiety, aren't they? And the SSRIs are the sort of new generation of pills, as distinct from benzodiazepines. Is that right?
yeah, do you know, I don't know. I don't even know that they know. Do you know what I mean? It's
Well,
like,
there has been a study come out very recently in a widely respected medical journal saying that, in fact, there is no evidence. I can only paraphrase what I read about it. There is no evidence that depression is the result of a chemical imbalance in the brain.
yeah.
And we'll talk about this later, but depression, if you want to give it another name, which is despair, is a spiritual phenomenon. It's not a chemical one, but we'll get to that in a minute.
No,
let's talk about
let's
talk about your addiction and your dependence on these things. So you were on SSRIs and benzodiazepines
and then
opiates.
Yeah, the opiate.
So doctor, and at one stage he referred to it as a cocktail.
Yeah, that was the final. But that was when he put me on an antipsychotic as well. So what happened was I started having car accidents fairly regularly, crashing into the back of cars, and I'd go to him to get my prescription, And he'd say, "How are things going?" I said, "Oh, I can't believe it. I had another car accident," and he'd up my dose. And then I hurt my neck in one of the car accidents. The third time I crashed into the back of someone, hurt my neck, and that's when he put me on tramadol, which is an opiate. And as I said, these drugs really agree with me. I was like, this doctor really gets me, you know, like I'm like the Michael Jackson of parenting, not in that pedophile way.
Yeah.
Just, you know, I can be drugged.
Just to be clear, yeah.
I can be drugged up and doing everything. I was doing it all.
So you were functional, except for the car crashes.
Well, I was a zombie. Like people were just going, "What are you doing?"
Really?
You know, well, I was bungling everywhere. But
what made you feel you were on top of things?
Well, I just wasn't freaking out. I just didn't care. I just didn't care.
Yeah.
If I messed up, it just didn't matter. Everyone else was freaking out and I was just chill.
Right. How are your kids coping with all this?
Well, they were blowing up. They had the time of their lives. They were just running amok. You know, they were that age where they were getting into drugs and alcohol themselves, and shamefully I was buying them drugs and alcohol, you know, before they were old enough to.
Do you think you would have done that if you hadn't been on this cocktail of
Well, we'll never
prescription
know.
drugs?
But there was a whole lot of things that I did that were really wrong and inappropriate when I was on those drugs. And I can't tell you which one of the drugs it was that led me to do that. But when I saw, you know, research into the fact that some of the school shooters and the terrible things that have happened with, you know, mass shootings have happened to, when people have been on SSRIs, I got it. I said, oh yeah, I can see that. Because all bets are off. You're in a different world. It's like you've wandered into some other kind of reality.
Well, like you said, that there aren't words to describe the hell you go in. Can you, I mean, I know I've already asked you this, but can you revisit that? What's it like to be at the bottom of that pit?
Well, I hadn't got anywhere near the bottom of the pit. I was just a zombie and thinking I was, you know, functioning. What happened was my mum got, she went and had root canal therapy and didn't have dementia before she went in, and then she had dementia after she came out. And apparently it's not that uncommon when you have a, what's called a general anaesthetic for older people. She was in her 80s. And suddenly Mum disappeared, and Mum was like the bedrock of my 5 brothers and my life. You know, probably too much, you know. You know, she's the most beautiful woman ever. And we were just so fortunate and so thankful to have her as a mum. And Dad was great too, but Mum was very affectionate and loving. And suddenly she'd disappeared. And I went to the doctor and he said, oh, you look terrible. What's happened now? And I said, oh, Mum's got dementia. So he prescribed me Zyprexa.
So what's that?
That's
what class does that fit?
antipsychotic.
Antipsychotic.
It's
So you're already on benzodiazepines, opiates, SSRIs, and then an antipsychotic.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Well, we'll get to the ethical standards of that later. But what was that cocktail like?
Well, that's the exact term he used. He was like, it was like I was a little lab rat. I was an experiment. He was looking at me and going, what about we try some of this? And I was
what
like...
What about we try some of this?
Yeah, and it was like, he said, this Zyprexa is usually given to people who have schizophrenia. That drug gave me schizophrenia. How did
that manifest?
Oh, man.
You heard voices?
You wouldn't wish it on anyone. It is terrifying.
Were you hearing voices?
Yeah. And I was having visual hallucinations of myself hanging from the rafters. And that went, well, the thing that he did that was even worse than putting me on that Zyprexa was taking me off it so quickly. I was on it for a couple of months. Oh man, my dreams were like these flowering colours of violence. It was like something was going on inside my brain. It was like whatever the chemicals are, the neurochemicals that were in there, they were just washing all over the place like a swimming pool in an earthquake. It was crazy. And I had a big experience with drugs, and I was thinking, is this because I'm such a bloody idiot and took so much acid when I was younger? Is my mind not, you know, suited to these mind-altering drugs? But when I told him that I couldn't cope with it because I was just seeing terrible visions of myself dead and decay. Everywhere I looked, I saw decay. Like, I couldn't look at a baby in a pram without thinking that poor little thing's going to die one day. All I saw was death, and all I wanted to do was die, get it over and done with. So suddenly I understood the term suicidal ideation. I'd never felt suicidal in my life, but I was to be suicidal on a minute-to-minute basis every waking hour for the next 3.5 years.
Well, I'll read a passage from... You're a very good writer, Monty.
Thank you.
And for viewers who don't know the Webber family, they're quite well known around Bondi parts, and we'll get to that as well. But your mum was a very accomplished artist, so your family was quite creative, and you're a good writer. And this is from the letter you wrote to your doctor, describing what it was like at that lowest point, one of the lowest points. All I could see around me was decay and death. All beauty had vanished. I was convinced that only bad things were ever going to happen in the future. Dreadfully bad things. It felt like anything good that was ever going to happen had already happened. As if all joy was in the past, my future appeared very dark, frightening. That's if I was a doctor and I received that, I'd question what I'd done.
Not so much as a sorry.
Not so much as a sorry. So one of the points you made with this doctor was, if you'd warned me about what it's like to come off this stuff, I never would have done it.
Well, yeah, I was filming also, and so I had to go away occasionally making surfing films, and I didn't know that. Well, I didn't even know that I had to take my pills with me. I mean, he certainly never said, don't stop taking these because you might have seizures and die. It was like he was just this ultimate salesman, just selling me this stuff. And look, when it got to its worst, I woke up one morning and it was literally the most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen, and all I could see was hell. It was like a lake of hell before me. And, you know, I'm not exaggerating to say it was like there were bodies in those flames. And I realised that it was a spiritual attack. And I realised that there kind of was a devil, because I just wasn't that bad a guy. I hadn't been that bad of a person that I deserved to feel this bad about myself, and it's indescribable. I don't know that anyone could ever comprehend how bad you can actually feel about yourself. And it's so odd, because it's actually a form of ego. It's still you're at the centre of everything. It's not I'm unreal, it's I'm terrible. It's just, you know, I had to, look, it took years and years, but I had to stop putting myself right at the centre of the universe. But
that's a result of your upbringing and being a surfer. I mean, surfers are very narcissistic people. We're very self-centred.
Super selfish.
Yeah, so we'll get to that, because surfers are also very hedonistic, and I think you've probably lived one of the more hedonistic lives among surfers. But let's just talk about your suicide attempt.
Okay, so what happened was, it's a terrible thing, and it's painful to revisit, but it's very, very important, because if anyone could avoid doing this, that's really almost worth going through it for that. That day that I saw the lake of fire, the sunrise out over Pippi Beach from my upstairs apartment in Yamba, I realised, I talked to a woman, a friend of mine, and told her what I was going through, and I was honest for the first time with someone else in the program, in the AA program, what I was doing, and because I knew she'd been through something similar. Same doctor. Benzos, not all the others, but benzos. She couldn't believe how many drugs I was taking, as prescribed. I never took them anything other than as prescribed. But she told me the terrible news that I couldn't just go off them, and that it could take me up to a decade to get better, and that I had to wean myself incredibly slowly off each of the pills. And I was taking 15 pills a day. There was 5 different types, but I was taking multiple, you know.
Wow.
Anyway.
And you had to wean off them a quarter of a tablet at a time.
Oh, even less. It's extraordinary how the small amount, much smaller than that. But I realised that I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And then I realised that this is a terrible thing to say, but I realised that everyone would be better off without me. Like the best thing I could do. This is why a friend of ours has committed suicide recently in Bondi. Some people have been quite critical of him, but I really hope that those people never get to find out what it's like to try and, or, you know, to want to kill yourself, because it is such, you're so tormented and you're so generally exhausted that you can't, not only can't you make a rational decision, I mean, to my mind, your brain's essentially broken. And
well, the criticism most people have of those who commit suicide is that they don't stop to think about the pain they cause to the people they leave behind.
well, that's not true. You're thinking about the other people all the time as well. You know, it just makes you feel even worse about yourself. Thinking, you know, it's one of those things. It's like you feel like, look, I can't. Well, everyone gets really sick of you and bored of you in the madness that you're in. Like, and that's understandable. I don't know how much patience I would have if someone was as psychotic as because I became psychotic. And, you know, and I don't know how...
In what ways?
Well, certainly the audio hallucinations, hearing people talking about me in a disparaging way. Like if I was saying Coles, I'd hear people saying, they weren't even talking. I'd hear their thoughts.
Wow.
And they
so
were bad.
how did you try to kill yourself?
Okay, so that day I realised I wanted to kill myself, so I went to the hospital, but it was too busy, and you know, I don't want to you know, speak ill of the hospital system, but I told them that I was suicidal, and they just said, "Oh, just go and take a seat." And after a while, I just went, "I mean, you're in utter despair, and I just left, and I didn't know what to do. It was bloody harrowing. And I just went, I have to go home and I'll just take all my pills and then just go to bed.
So this is a pretty sad reflection on our, you know, supposedly brilliant modern medical system. It was modern medicines that put you in this situation, and when you reached out to an emergency department, they said go and have a lie down.
Well, it gets worse. So I went home. I took all my pills. I went to sleep, and it's terrible because the last thing I thought before I fell asleep, not too long before my 10-year-old daughter, Tallulah, had asked me what suicide was. And I'd told her that it was, you know, when someone kills themselves. And she said, why would anyone want to do that? And I explained to her that it was usually because they were really depressed and they weren't thinking clearly. And she said to me, we have to make sure that if we ever feel suicidal, to ring one another and make sure we don't do it. Anyway, the last memory I had before I crashed out was Tallulah's face. Oh, man. And I was betraying her.
So, well, we're happy to report that you survived.
Well, that wasn't my final attempt. When I woke up about 4 hours later, I was completely distraught and disappointed. And so I tried to hang myself. I got a piece of rope and I tried to hang myself a couple of times, but everything I tried to hang myself from broke. I must weigh too much. Also, it was really uncomfortable, the rope on my neck. I was thinking, where's my Cranbrook tie? This is awful. And this is how mad I was. I was even thinking, I could be the guy who invented really nice, fluffy things to hang yourself with. Like, surely
there's probably a market in that.
There would have to be, wouldn't there? Anyway, look, it's laughing about something terribly sad. But after that, I decided I had to slit my wrists. So the kids were in the lounge room watching TV. And I went into the bathroom with some razor blades and slit my wrists. And you know what? The most extraordinary thing happened. Something or someone said, don't hurt yourself. And then there was this sense, I love you. And I had no idea where that came from. But I came to my senses and I went, what am I doing? And I could hear the TV, and suddenly I was back in some kind of reality, even though I'd taken 50 Valium, 25 Tramadol, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm like I should be in the Olympic Games of drug taking. So just shake it off.
Yeah,
so I drove myself.
That's a gold medal attempt right there.
I was bleeding and I obviously had to be stitched up. So I drove myself. I didn't say anything to the kids. I drove myself to Maclean Hospital, and they stitched me up, and someone said I was an idiot, and they put me in a room which was like a cell, and they left with a guard on the door, and they left me in that room for 12 hours, and didn't contact my family and my kids or anything. I was completely out of it. I didn't know. I didn't know what to do, and somehow, I'd left my phone at home. My family knew that I was in a really bad way, so they thought I'd topped myself, but they couldn't find me.
So your kids were alone for 12 hours, not knowing where you were?
Yeah, overnight. Yeah, and I tell you what, you don't feel good about that as a parent, putting them through that, them being kind of pretty sure you've killed yourself. And
just to lighten it up a little bit,
can we getting a bit dark?
We'll return to this, but can we just fast forward to how your kids are now?
They're fantastic.
How many years ago was that suicide attempt?
9 years ago.
9 years ago. So your kids are now, what, early 20s?
Flynn's going to be 24 next month.
Yeah.
He's studying engineering and he's working full-time in Brisbane. He's like the success story of the family.
Yeah. And
he just sold me his car.
Yeah.
He's letting me pay it off.
Yeah, God bless him.
Beatrice is living with her boyfriend in Newcastle. She's really great and she's on top of everything. And Tallulah is living with her boyfriend in Yamba. So all my kids have finished school, left home, living with the boy and girlfriends, and working full time and not asking for money.
Yeah.
The horror movie we went through, in some ways, was the making of all of us.
Yes. Well, let's get back to that voice you heard saying, "I love you."
Okay, so
who was that?
I believe it was God. And
for once, you heard a voice that cared about you.
Well, yeah, you know what? I'd had the most loving upbringing, been surrounded by care and considerate people, but I'd got myself into this dark place, and it's just when you can't see anything but death for years, it wears you down. And I all the things that I thought about life, I felt like I was wrong. Like I'd lived my life as a surfer, doing what I wanted when I wanted, and I just thought I'm never going to lie in bed on my deathbed wishing I'd worked harder. And I used to lie there going, oh, I wish I'd just had a job, a normal job. Like I'd made surfing films, written for tracks, had art exhibitions, surfed my heart out. I just lived incredibly selfishly, and you know what? I don't even regret it. It's like if you were living in some really difficult situation on the other side of the world and you thought there's some guy living across from the other side of the world who could have the most fantastic life, you'd say, have it. Go on, do it. Don't, but, there's a lot of ways to look at the past, and it's best not to kind of look at it too much.
Yeah, well, surfers are very impulsive people as well. I mean, one of the things about being a surfer is that your life and your daily routines and your movements are in one way or another to whatever extent determined by whether there's waves or not.
Completely. My entire life was determined by the swell direction, the wind, the wind direction, the tide. Yeah. And where
so
I
unlike
was.
most other people, surfers have to drop everything when the waves are on.
It wasn't that we wanted to, we just had to.
Yeah.
So it's a very kind of unrealistic lifestyle, but it's really fantastic. Like it's so rewarding, and surfing proved to be an incredible part of my recovery, getting back into the surf. But that day when I went when I went, after I was sent home, one of my brothers had run the hospital and discovered where I was and came and picked me up. My other brother took my car and they took me home. There wasn't a call from the hospital. There wasn't a call from my doctor. There wasn't. The only thing that my friend who I'd talked to, she said, you got to go back to your doctor and get a whole lot more pills because you can't go off these. You've taken all your pills. You have to get another supply and then wean yourself off them. So I went back to the doctor and he seemed genuinely upset to see me with my bandaged wrists and my,
Rope
bruising
burn.
around my rope burn. But when I was leaving the doctor, the receptionist who I'd become quite good friends with over the years, she suggested I get another doctor. She kind of whispered it to me. Maybe you should think about trying another doctor. And it wasn't until later that I discovered that there was a lot of people who'd been through the same thing. They wanted me to get involved in a class action against him, but I just, not only I wanted to move forward. I just couldn't go backwards into it.
So what did your new doctor say about the previous
Well,
one?
not much. It was very hard for any doctor because I changed doctors twice and then I saw a couple of psychologists and a psychiatrist. And it's very rare for a doctor to speak ill of the decisions of another doctor. The one thing they all said was, I'm sure he had your best interest at heart. Thought, God, isn't that some famous, great, let's just see where that goes.
Yeah.
And then so I had to, my new doctor, my third doctor was quite good, but it was an agonisingly long and painful and dark journey. It took 3.5 years for me to get off all the tablets except for the SSRI. They put me on a different SSRI, metazapine instead of Lexapro, which was actually, the blessing was I slept well through that period. And, I know some people coming off benzos who don't sleep well, and I couldn't add that to the mix. It was too distressing as it was.
So
And-
is coming off these things the worst part?
Oh, yeah, man. That's,
So it took you 3 years, over 3 years.
yeah, about 3.5 years.
Talk us through it. So this is worse than the anxiety that caused you to go on these drugs in the first place. I mean, that in itself.
It's so ironic because they're treating you for anxiety. Like when my original doctor gave me the Valium, he said, "Oh, you don't want to be stressing out and having anxiety attacks. Anxiety will kill you." Then when the pills almost killed me and I tried to kill myself, he was like, he just had a complete reversal. He was like, yeah, you need to kind of be taking medication. And I knew I needed to get off the medication. It was only my third doctor that kind of helped me get off the medication. I tried to get into psych wards and rehabs and stuff. There was no psych ward in Australia that I could get into. There was no rehab I could get into, anything.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier. So you can't get into a psych ward if you're on benzodiazepines.
Yeah.
So you're among the most the most in need of a psych ward, and because of your dependence on these pills, they won't let you in. How does that make sense?
I don't know. There was one woman at one place I talked to up in Lismore, and she said, she was the only one who really spoke fully, openly and honestly about it. She said, benzos are evil. And I don't doubt that benzos are really helpful in the short term. But she said benzos are evil, and the fact that we can't help people to get off benzos is even more evil.
But these pills have been part of Western culture since.
And how
the
don't we
60s.
know? How didn't I know this?
Exactly.
Who's keeping this secret?
Yeah.
But when that letter, I wrote that letter, I think about 6 years ago, that you just quoted from. I sent that to newspapers all over Australia. No one was interested in the story. I understand the nature of news, and things become a part of the popular narrative at the time. But and it certainly wasn't then. But you were the only one who got back to me and said that's heartbreaking.
Well, that's I don't want to say that's it's more a reflection on my my journalistic peers than it is on me. I mean, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to be moved by that letter. Now, just to be clear, the letter was written to your doctor to explain the hell you'd been through as a result of these prescriptions, and the key point in it was that if you'd warned me about this, I never would have embarked on these prescriptions. And
I was begging him not to do it again.
yes,
That was the actual real point, was
right.
you please don't do this to anyone else.
Well, let's get on to that. So Australians are the third highest per head of population users of antidepressants. I think it's the United States first, if I'm not mistaken, it's Greenland second for some reason, and then Australia. It seems like the more antidepressants we take, the more depressed we get. So you're now a member of a group called Benzo Buddies, is that right?
Yeah, it's a... Man, there's a whole world of people out there who are suffering in ways that people could not imagine and probably won't find out about, because it's just not a part of the business model as it was described to me once. However much money was made from me was only ever going to be thousands of dollars across a couple of years on these pills, getting me addicted to these pills. But there's millions of me.
Yeah.
There's millions of me across the world.
What's it like to be a member of this group? I mean, it sounds like AA in some way, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was so overwhelming that my way of dealing with it was I became a support to a woman who's kind of where I was about 3 or 4 years ago. So we speak through Facebook Messenger every couple of days, and really I just encourage her and just tell her she's in the horrors. It's, no one could imagine what it's like unless you've been through it. The intrusive thoughts, every couple of seconds you have this catastrophic intrusive thought. What's happened is your brain's been so damaged, and because of the variety of pills that she's taken and I've taken, so we're quite a good match in that way. I understand that, and only because I had it described to me, the brain damage is it's actually a prescription drug-induced brain injury. And it goes so deep, and because your brain is where you generate your thoughts and your reasons and stuff for living, it's throwing up all of these really, really random panicked thoughts about what's happened, because it understands there's been trauma, but it's trying to work out what to do, and it's just like a Gatling gun just shooting crazy ideas out everywhere, many of which are suicide. Many of which are just, you just really have to bite the bullet and just kill yourself.
Do you just lose control of your thoughts? Is that what happens?
Oh, completely, yeah. And and people will say, oh, you've got to learn to be more positive. You go, oh, I wish. Or you've got to practice acceptance. You go, oh, yeah. It's, your brain has been completely hijacked. And not just hijacked, it's like by 1,000 crazy jackals that are each fighting to tell you the worst thing about yourself.
So what are your conversations with this woman like? Are you saving her from committing suicide?
Sometimes, but more often it's just she doesn't have anyone in the world who understands what she's going through.
Well, that's the other thing you've mentioned to me before, is the loneliness of it.
Oh yeah, it's a long and lonely journey, and it's bloody biblical. It's like Job or something. You just go, why? I didn't want this for myself. It's extraordinary what's come from it, though. Like, as I've joked, it's been the making of me. But they say pain is the touchstone of growth. Enough with the growth.
Enough growing already.
Yeah, enough.
Yeah. Let's go back to your youth, though, because a lot of people are more than well aware of Bondi as a internationally famous beach, but you grew up there before it became so famous. But it was, it sounds to me like it was a bit like Venice Beach was in California back in the day. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't sophisticated, but there was some pretty hardcore people there.
It was fun. It was much more dangerous, but it was much more fun. It was completely different. In my memoir, Bondi Days, I I started in about 1965 when we first went down to Bondi as a small family before Will and Ben were born. I've got 5 brothers, and we, you know, Santa Claus came in on the bow of a surf life-saving boat and gave out toys. The toy I got was a slingshot, and my joke is that I was going to need it. It was full on. There was by the time we'd progressed from riding coolites, being in the nippers at North, and then riding coolites and shaping our own coolites, and going down to South Bondi. It was 1974, so I was 13 years old, and it was a whole other world. And a part of that world was actually drugs and alcohol. And so we surfed, and I mean, I didn't start smoking weed until I was 17, but, you know, there was, I mean, one of the terrible statistics that I quote is my brothers and I know 70 guys from Bondi who have committed suicide in the last 55 years.
70. So this is fascinating because surfers live a very supposedly enviable life, and I imagine your generation of Bondi surfers was pretty high amongst that because, you know, you had famous surfers in your gang, you know, like Richard Cram and Shane Horan and people who went on to surf on the world tour and so on, and you were at an urban beach that was one of the sort of most intense in the country, and yet, despite all that hedonism and all that fun,
All because of it.
70 people. You and your brothers. You've got 5 brothers.
Yeah, so
You and your brothers between you.
That's quite a few generations.
No, 70. Wow.
You know, that's the
That's
older guys.
extraordinary.
That's
So what's the
older
link
guys.
between the hedonism and the suicide? Is there one?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
It's not the answer.
Hedonism.
Yeah. It's not the answer. I mean,
Who
surely
knew, Monty?
that's
Who knew?
surely that's evidence enough.
Yeah.
But you know, we live in a time and a place where it's sold to us.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, it's, you know, it's who, you know, for the most important person in the world, you.
Yeah. Or only a surfer knows the feeling.
Yeah, well.
Let's cut to you at G-Land in the opening sequence of a Billabong movie.
Yeah, Billabong Surf into Summer, that was their first VHS. And the cool thing about that wave was, well, I was making a film. I took camera gear across to Indonesia many times, but I was filming and my cousin shot a surfing session of mine, my cousin Paul Bucknell, and I couldn't believe he kept me in frame because it was a long lens. It's a long way out at G-Land, you know, and there's the shutter. It was a Ballieu Super 8 and there was the shutter thing, but he somehow kept me in frame, and I get 3 barrels. It was like, at the time, it was the best tube of my life. But, you know.
What year was this?
84.
84, yeah.
So 40 years ago. But it found its way into the Billabong, into their first VHS, Surf in the Summer. But the classic thing was they never named who it was. And that was a really wide-selling, you know, VHS. And everyone else in the film was named. So it was this enigmatic thing, like, who was the guy?
Who's the underground legend out of G-Land?
I couldn't have written it better myself.
So what was G-Land in the 80s would have been pretty cool too, I suppose.
Yeah, look, it was fantastic. I went there for the first time with my brother Dan and some other friends in 1983. And, you know, there was only 12 guys in the surf camp there. There was only one surf camp. No one was surfing at low tide, and so we went out and surfed at low tide and just thought, you know, there's so much more to this break than meets the eye. And that's really true of G-Land. There's so many different sections, and it was like...
Well, people go there for specific full moon tides and stuff.
Yeah. Well, we did that. We always timed our visits around the moon.
Those early trips to Indonesia, especially in the 80s, they had a kind of a spiritual feel to them, didn't they? Because we were coming out of, you know, our suburban habitats and, you know, crowded, not very good quality surf, and into, you know, a third world country, but with incredibly tropical terrain and perfect surf. Do you think they were kind of spiritual experiences, those early ones?
Yeah, I really do. It's just that, well, do you know, for my brothers and I, we had quite a few, there was a lead up to Indonesia. So we were really fortunate. We grew up in Rose Bay, and my parents took us over to Lord Howe Island in 1973 by flying boat, and we discovered all these incredible surf breaks over there. And Lord Howe, for anyone who hasn't been there, is like the most beautiful place on earth. And so we surfed all these waves and went back to Lord Howe repeatedly. And not long after that, we started going to Angourie, and Dad bought John Witzig's little surf shack there for $17,000 in 1978. So we spent a lot of time, now I live in Angourie or thereabouts. So we had worked out very young, we want to find the best waves in the most beautiful places, really just the best waves, but as it turned out, they were in the most beautiful places. And then, obviously Morning of the Earth had the biggest effect on surfers. Not quite as big, but almost as big as Endless Summer. But they are the two movies that are at the top of the pile of that genre. But so Indonesia was fantastic, but it was also, for me, my older brothers weren't nearly as into drugs as I was, so I was right into mushies and things like that. And I loved taking magic mushrooms and going surfing and doing dangerous things like buying hash and
Indonesia.
Yeah, you really shouldn't mess with anything. My dad would beg me, don't do any of that crazy shit when you're over there. But I didn't heed that warning. Yeah. But it is spiritual. But having become a Christian, I just wonder what those spirits really are. I'm not saying that ours is the only one and true God, although it does say that in the Bible. But there's a lot of crazy spirits running around over there. Yeah. And you've only got to take some magic mushrooms to experience them.
To see them.
Yeah.
Well, let's circle back to the despair that you felt. I think it's a fallacy that is rapidly becoming apparent to a lot of people, that the solution to the despair that we sometimes feel is not a tablet, but it's either spiritual or it's religious.
Well, if you were going to try and describe it outside of theology or outside of religious terms, it's got to do with transcending ego, how you achieve that, how you stop to think of yourself as the centre of everything. That is the catastrophe that we're involved in, the narcissism, the self-centeredness. One of the most fascinating things that I learnt in AA is how good it is for you to be of service to others. Not only do you get yourself out of your own thoughts, it's my opinion that you are exactly as miserable as the amount of time you spend thinking about yourself.
That's probably a very accurate mathematical
Yeah. I bet you there's a graph that could show that.
Yeah.
Or a pie chart or something. You know how I feel about pie charts.
Yeah.
But the self-centeredness, as soon as you consider someone else, or even if you just wish something good upon someone, or you pray for someone else, or you offer them help, or you even try and lift their spirits, you're uplifted. No longer is it, what can I get? It's the giving is receiving thing. There's a great saying, the best exercise for a human heart is to lift another person's spirits. And
are you
really
able to
true.
do that when you're on that cocktail that your doctor prescribed you?
No, I was so self-absorbed. And that's the hallmark of misery. There are people who have survived. Some of my favourite books are things like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Auschwitz Survivor.
Yeah.
The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom.
Yeah.
Christian has also survived.
I think one of the things about Frankl, I haven't read those other ones, but one of the things about Frankl is, which he doesn't articulate explicitly, but he does seem to emphasise that gratitude will make you happier, no matter how awful your circumstances are. There is always still something to be grateful for, and that's Frankl's Jewish, but it's a particularly Judeo-Christian concept, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the
Are
things.
you grateful for what you've been through?
Completely.
That's amazing.
Although, if you were to say, how much money would you charge to do it again? There's no amount of money you could give me to do that again. The only reason I would put myself through that again would be to prevent one of my children from having to go through it. But even then, who am I to say that I would be not then preventing them from growing and learning as I've been forced into it? I didn't want this amount of growing and learning. I had a really great life. I was really selfish and self-centred, and I loved it. But I've been forced, well, I was not only forced into the church, I was forced into a really, really serious relationship with God.
What's that relationship like?
Well, it's based on the Gospels. So it's the New Testament, although I've read the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Old Testament's a bit kooky, but... Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
It's very hard to follow.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The New Testament, the Gospels in particular, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, man, they really describe the human condition, and in the most fantastic way, because I identify with their selfishness is in there. But there's something extraordinary in actually the name Jesus. And I had Christians around me my whole life. My aunts, a couple of my aunts were in AA on both sides, and they became Christians, and a few others. My cousin, my closest cousin, became not only a Christian but a minister. And all these different steps along the way. I almost became a Christian with him 40 years ago, but I just went to the pub instead. I was just so rebellious, and I always put things off. I thought maybe one day I'll do it. It's like one day I'll do yoga, one day, but not today. But I was forced into going to church, and I was still completely insane. So I've been going to church for 8 years now, and it was impossible for me to comprehend what was being talked about or understand anything to do with the blood of the cross or the whole macabre kind of crucifixion. But I made a really fortunate decision, which I think saved my life. Someone said you need to read the Bible. Even if you don't understand it, immerse yourself in the Word. And I started to read, and I went, what the hell is this? This guy's 900 years old? How's that? And I started to pick holes in it. And then I just thought, if I'm going to give this thing a good go, I'm just going to I'm going to believe it. It's just a decision. It'll be an experiment.
But it's also, there's quite an intellectual aspect to Christianity too, though. It has quite a deep, especially the Catholic Church, has a deep intellectual history. Thomas Aquinas, of course, but it goes all the way back to Aristotle, which is pre-Christian. But our entire civilization is based on Christian fundamentals, and one of the most basic fundamental is that this life is a battle between good and evil. Now we have been sort of lulled into thinking that it's just a battle between left and right of politics or one race against another. But when you boil it down, it's good versus evil. Now, you, at your worst, were probably being lured by Satan, and it was God who told you, don't go there. Yeah,
well, I do believe it's irreducible. What's going on here is irreducible beyond the battle between good and evil. The mistake that a lot of people make is that they think, they don't realise that battle is within themselves. It's like Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil is not between countries or communities or even family members. It's right down the centre of every human heart. Therein lies the battle. And the wonderful thing that I find, I'm so thankful that I grew up in a Christian country, not to speak disparagingly about anyone else, and I know that if I lived in any other country, I would have been that religion or that cultural, But I love that we're called to love. We're not called to hate. We're called to know Jesus and make Jesus known. And it's like, it gives so much meaning and purpose to your life. The thing that I was always...
There's nothing uncool about that either. just to be
well,
clear.
cool is cool is a big part of what's gone wrong. You know, I spent my life trying to be cool, and succeeding, I'll have you know. But it is, man, you got to be really careful. Cool kills. Like, I see all sorts of groups of people fighting to be the coolest and destroying everything good in their family. They destroy every single part. You can tell something about something if it's destroying everything.
That's well said.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, that's
So
not a
the other-
coincidence.
So the other part of Christianity is also the that we are compelled or encouraged to seek truth and beauty in the world, and
not
you've-
feel bad about it.
and not feel bad about it,
Or even
Yeah.
believe that there is such thing.
Exactly. Now, tell me about the role that art has played in your recovery.
Well, do you know, it's really funny that the period I went to art school, I left school in 1979 and went to East Sydney Tech and went to art school, and I grew up in a big extended family of artists and sculptors and photographers, and so I always loved art. But that period, this nihilism kind of entered the arts, and it wasn't so much about beauty as it was about disrupting or disturbing. Or
Challenging.
upsetting. Yeah,
Yeah.
or interrogating.
Yeah.
You're going to interrogate me?
What is this, a police interview?
Yeah. Spanish Inquisition. But, so, you know, when I worked as I majored in sculpture and worked with Michael Snape, a great Australian sculptor, for 6 months in 1982. We got a grant from the Visual Arts Board. The last grant I ever got, which as it turns out I'm pretty happy about,
Yeah.
because when you take all those grants, you're selling your soul to them. All of their ideologies, all my friends who got all the grants across all that period of time, they've been depleted as artists. They don't exist. They have nothing to say about the human spirit. They have nothing to say about the human dilemma. They've been completely railroaded into the agenda, or the 3 or 4 agendas. I remember the last time I went for to try and get funding for Liquid Time. You know my surf film, Liquid Time?
I've seen it, yes. Yep.
Yeah, some people love it because it's the only surfing film without a surfer in it. Anyway, I tried to get some funding to help finish that, and I was talking to a woman I won't mention the funding body, film body. She said, but what's the issue you're addressing? I said, it's about beauty. It's the most beautiful little 6-inch waves you've ever seen. And I've spent 2 years filming and editing these things. It's this mad art house work of art, you know, which went on to be shown in art galleries like the Barbican Centre and all over the world, you know. And I actually won an International Cinematography Award for it, but she couldn't
Can viewers see that anywhere? Is it on YouTube now?
Yeah, I think you can find it on YouTube. There's a 3-minute section.
Liquid Time by
Liquid
Monty
Time.
Webber.
There's a 3.5 minute segment of it in a retrospective of mine that I've just posted on YouTube. So if you
Okay.
go to Monty Webber on YouTube, and
All right.
there's only a couple of films, so I'm not very organised when it comes to things like that. But she, well, it's very rare that they would even engage with you because they just say no. I was told very early in the piece after I got that funding in 1982 to work with Michael Snape, by a guy at the Icebergs of all places. I've tried to get funding to make a couple of short documentaries, and he said, "Oh, you're the surfer," you know. And I said, "Yeah." I go, "How come I can't get funding?" And he goes, "Oh, Monty, you're the wrong everything." I went,
The wrong everything.
"What, everything? All of it?
Yeah.
Nothing redeemable? No, nothing to offer?" And he said, "No, look, your stories, your ideas are great, and your filmmaking ability is really good, but we're interested in other voices."
Yeah. Yeah, they're interested in the voices that they agree with, which is the echo chamber that we now live in. Now we live in changing times, Monty. What do you make of the changes that we are living through right now?
That's a pretty small and uncontroversial question.
Yeah.
Well, it's all happening, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's coming out. I'm surprised that I even have any kind of grasp on what is going on. I wasn't interested in politics at all. I didn't vote for 40 years Do you know what I mean? I was not interested. I'm too self-absorbed to be interested in any of that stuff. But how I came to this was quite interesting. I got some messages and calls about, well, it was in 2016. It seems like, well, it was when Trump came on the scene.
Yeah.
And I got some messages from friends of mine.
This bloke here.
Yeah, I actually love him. He's so... Look, anyone who can make up nicknames as good as that or troll people as well as that really should be running the whole joint.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
That's
Australia needs its own Trump, just
that's
for the
way
record.
men feel about men.
Yeah.
And that might not be such a bad thing. He's like bloody George Patton or someone. Audacity, audacity, audacity.
Yeah.
Anyway, by all rights, I shouldn't have got to where I've got to, say politically, because, you know, I'm in the arts. All my friends are leftists and I love them. They're funny, they're fun, they're super creative, they're amazing musicians and filmmakers and writers and stuff. But they have been lied to by this incredibly sophisticated machine, this fear factory, and are convinced that we're mad.
The conservatives are mad.
Yeah, they can't believe. Well, one of the problems is you can't really have a conversation. You know how we're having a conversation now? You can't actually have a conversation.
There was an American conservative, I think it might have been William Buckley, said in reference to what Americans call liberals, he said, they think we, conservatives, they think we are evil, we just think they're wrong.
Well, the terrible thing is they are evil.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? When no one is completely evil, but evil is having its way with them. Like if everything you touch you destroy, and this has been my entire life. I've had to watch this. As I say, I love my leftist friends, and I steer clear of political conversations because, well, largely because they can't have a conversation. I grew up I was born in 1961. My uncles and aunts were all hippies, but my parents, although artists and considered hippies, they were very conservative by comparison. So there were discussions, particularly with even my grandparents. So my grandfather, both my grandfathers, Captain Pearl was the captain of like 6 or 7 different ships during wartime. You know, so he was in a variety of theatres of war, you know.
During the World War II?
Yeah, and Vietnam and Korea. Right. And anyway, these people had a very great sense of responsibility. My other grandfather was in the primary industry as a wool classer. So very, very, very strong sense of responsibility. That next generation that came along, the one who I emulated, were more interested in their rights. What can I get for me? They were the me generation, and I'm a part of it. Like, you know, I don't want to have to do that. I don't, someone else can do that.
But all that's changing now, Monty, isn't it? People are returning to conservative values and nationalism.
Well, I'll tell you where I'm really encouraged. I see it in my son. So what happened, and other young people, but what happened was, you know, across our lives, there were a whole lot of things that we would normally change, and we were changing, and we were moving in the right direction. But it was like, it wasn't enough for people who are... See, if you live essentially a godless life, you need some way of proving to yourself that you're going to be safe, and that's to be a part of the group. And to be a part of the group, you have to continually signal to the group that you're a good person. And already you're on a road to deception and hell, because you don't understand it's not actually about being a good person, which is, that's a philosophical but also religious conversation. No,
you mean a good person on other people's terms?
Well, it's actually not about being a good person for them. It's about being seen to be a good person. It's all virtue signalling. You can see it when you have been through something like what I've been through, and you can see every thought in someone's mind, or every mannerism describes what's going on in them. And I've sat through thousands of AA meetings and also on Zoom meetings where, you know, without jumping to conclusions about someone or passing judgment, you can see when someone's displaying something. Like, say, for example, if you were to watch Piers Morgan, he'll have two right-wing people, two left-wing people, and he loves sitting back and watching them fight. What I find fascinating, more interesting even than the conversation, is the behaviour. Generally speaking, the left-wings people will be performative. They'll be displaying, you know, condescension and laughing and rolling their eyes, and it's this adolescent display of superiority born out of inferiority. Whereas if you look at those conservatives, they're far more practical. They're not concerned with how they're looking. They're trying to describe what works and what doesn't work, and how across time we make little changes and improve things for everyone. But if Satan is at the core of what you're trying to achieve, you will find what seem to be the best causes and then get in and use those to destroy everything. And we can see it everywhere.
That's really well put, Monty. Just to wrap it up, though, there are a lot of people in Australia on antidepressants and various forms of SSRIs and benzodiazepines. Some of them might be watching this and wondering how the hell they get out of it. What's your advice?
Well, I don't give medical advice at all.
But join a group or find a buddy or what's...
Well, you know, I mean, you need to seek professional advice, and you need to find someone, like in every different aspect of what's going on in the world now, you actually have to find the person that's going to tell you the truth, and that's not as easy as you might think. You're going to hear a lot of different stuff, and you're going to have to work it out in relation to other people. You have to do your own research, and there is a truth there. But as far as kind of, you know, recommending what to do, I do think that if someone's suffering the effects of prescription drugs, particularly benzos, it's really great. You can find online groups like Benzo Buddies or any of the different drugs, you know, there's groups in relation to them, and you hear other people talking. This is why AA works and has worked, and it's been the most effective way of people, addicts. 12-step groups are all across the world, and there's like 100 different kinds, and it all goes back to the Book of James. First 5 steps straight out of the bloody Bible. Anyway, the reason it works is because, not only because you ask God for help and you humble yourself and you recognise you've got a problem, but you also hang out with other people who are suffering from the same illness, and you hear what they've done. And what they talk about isn't some unique invention or original idea. They're talking about what's worked for them, that they learnt that worked for someone else, and we're passing on the message. So that is actually what this whole thing is about, passing on the message, pass on the good message. Live not by lies. Don't tell any lies. I've tried it. I was a pathological liar. It will take you to hell, because the whole thing, everything is slippery slopes. Everything. But you can be on good slippery slopes that lead you to absolute contentment and full gratitude and appreciation and seeing miracles everywhere. I mean, either all of this is a miracle or none of it is a miracle. And when I think of the human body, there's something like 70 trillion human cells, every one of which is full of meaning and purpose. Why would the meaning and purpose end at some point at our skin or something, after it's created vision and digestion and you know, all these cells working together, collaborating, and not only to give you eyesight, but then what you get to see, the magnificence of creation, which, by implication, there's a creator. Thanks, Fred.
Good on you, Monty. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.